All right, well, let's go ahead and jump in. I don't want to take up too much time with the announcements. I want to get to our guests and the questions that we have for them. So, quick run of show. Welcome to this webinar called Buy-in or Backlash: Leadership and the Legal Realities of Accessibility. So we're going to jump in and have a conversation. We have some questions, but ultimately we want to hear your questions and try to help answer as many of them as we possibly can over the next hour or so as we dive into today's conversation. Before we get there, some housekeeping items. This session is being recorded and will be offered to all registrants after the webinar has concluded. So if you have to jump out a few minutes early, if you registered or you know somebody who registered that wasn't able to be here, they can catch the recording afterwards. Live captions are available. Just head into your Zoom features and turn on the closed caption option to get the captions for the webinar. And feel free to use the Q&A box throughout the session. We'll try to get to as many of your questions as we possibly can. Depending on how many there are, we may have to do some follow-ups there. But of course, today we are coming together to honor and celebrate the 35th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, a civil rights milestone that laid the foundation for everything we're talking about today, including recent updates that have happened and taken effect over the past year and into the coming years. So let's jump straight into intros. So a little bit about BIT if you're new here or this is your first time attending a webinar that BIT is a part of. The Blind Institute of Technology, or BIT, is a nonprofit dedicated to closing the employment gap for professionals with disabilities through tech training, accessibility consulting, and workforce partnerships. And our guest or our friend for today joins us from Converge Accessibility. If you're not familiar with Converge, Converge is a law firm and consulting group that helps organizations understand and meet their digital accessibility obligations, led by one of today's panelists and former DOJ attorney, Ken Nakata. Their team combines legal expertise with practical strategies to reduce risk and improve access for all. So with that, let's get to know our panelists. So let's jump in and let's get real when it comes to this conversation of accessibility, not just a legal checkbox, but as a leadership priority. Today's lineup includes two powerhouses with a resume that is a mile and a half long, but also two very good friends of mine who have been instrumental in my learning journey as somebody who works in this space as well. So I'll introduce myself first, and then I'll kick it over to you, Ken. My name is James Warnken. I am a legally blind digital accessibility expert here at BIT, helping organizations achieve their accessibility goals through auditing, testing, remediation, training, and education. So happy to be here. It's an honor to share the stage alongside of both Ken and Mike today, having this conversation, continuing to spread that awareness and that education. So Ken, I will kick it over to you. I won't even try to mention everything that you bring to this conversation.
Thanks, James. Thanks everybody. Glad to be here. I'm a principal with Converge Accessibility. My name is Ken Nakata. I've been in this space for about, oh gosh, let me see, since 1992, when the ADA first went into effect. That's when I joined the Justice Department as a trial attorney in the disability rights section, or what eventually became the disability rights section. And I've been working in accessibility ever since then. Starting around 2000, or about 1998, I started transitioning over towards digital accessibility from doing traditional built environment accessibility. And I think that background really is important because digital accessibility is part of this whole big thing of accessibility. Yet it is interesting to me how the built environment and traditional accessibility is only slowly beginning to grapple with digital technology. I'm going to correct one thing that James said, which is that we are not a law firm. And yes, I am a lawyer, but anything that I say, it's should be taken for educational purposes only, and it is not does not constitute legal advice. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike.
Hey Ken, I was wondering if you were gonna. I was like, when did you start hanging your hat out for that again? So,
We'll have to
yeah,
we'll have to update our notes.
yeah, no, it's all good. Yeah, the experience that you bring and really just the collaborative spirit that you bring to this space, Ken, is truly second to nobody within the digital accessibility, the accessibility space as a whole. Good morning, good afternoon, team. My name is Mike Hess. Full disclosure, I'm blind. I've been blind my entire life. I'm in my mid 50s now, so it's been a minute. And executive director and founder here at Blind Institute of Technology, BIT. And we are workforce development. We are the official training provider for Salesforce globally for people with disabilities. We are also the only nationally registered apprenticeship program for the pan disability community, to include the blind low vision community in the country with the Department of Labor. So everything that we do is to level up professionals with disabilities globally within the workplace. You cannot achieve that without digital accessibility. So that's how they are married. They're conjoined. Those are the topics we'll be talking about today. So thank you and welcome.
Cool. Well, again, there aren't, I don't think, two better people to have this conversation that we're about to get into besides you, Mike and Ken. Again, I've learned a lot of what I know about accessibility from spending a ton of time with both of you over the last couple of years. So excited to continue the conversation with some new friends and some new faces. So with that, before we get into the questions, I want to turn it over to you because Title II update is a hot topic right now. So Ken or Mike or both of you, if you wouldn't mind, give us just kind of a 30-second overview. What was included? What was the Title II update that took effect last spring?
Ken, I'm going
Sure.
to give that one to you, buddy.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. Sure. I'll give a real quick overview. So, in March of 2024, the Justice Department created a new regulation. It went final, but it didn't hit the Federal Register until April. What it basically requires is that all state and local governments now have to actually comply with WCAG. Before, they had to make sure that their websites were accessible. That's a requirement that's been required by the courts since about 2005. But now, all of a sudden, we're specific standards, the specific things that are included, certain things that are excluded, and so it gave a lot more definition to things, and it also made it a lot more enforceable so that a plaintiff or the government could always come after you.
Cool. Well, with that overview stated, we do have some deadlines coming up, whether depending on the size of your city or your entity, 26, 27 being those deadlines. So I want to start with probably a pretty heavy question, but to get it out there to get us sort of moving in that direction. So my first question for you is, are there any anticipated changes to those 2026, 2027 Title II update deadlines per the Trump administration?
Okay. Yes, we do have to address the elephant in the room. No, that accessibility issues have not been front of mind. And with the looming deadline in April, which is only coming up in it's a little over 6 months, we should be really, if anything would be taken really, really seriously in terms of the new administration and taking things off the table. You would think it would be that. There has been some movement oddly enough, to to strike the new construction requirements for buildings and facilities under Department of Energy's 504 requirement, which seemed like a bit odd because we were trying to figure out who gets funding from the Department of Energy to build facilities. Well, okay, we can think of like power stations and things like that, but how many of them employ people with disabilities? I don't know. I can't tell you those demographics. That was floated. It got so much immediate pushback that it was delayed. I think they had over 20,000 comments, so the Department of Energy had to delay that. I don't think that that's going to go through, and I think that there's not a whole lot of pushback on accessibility. It's not like, gender and race, which are really taking a hit.
Cool. And so to build on that, like you said, we're 6 months out, a little over 6 months out from our first deadline, the April 2026 deadline. But we're over a year since that final rule rolled out. So what changes have you seen transpire or sort of unfold over that period so far? And what do you kind of anticipate for these next 6 months or year and a half?
Do you want to take a swat at that first, Mike?
Oh, heck no. This is all legal, man.
Oh, okay, fine.
No, 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 Ken. I'm here for comic relief. You are.
I
So,
thought that's what I was here for.
I defer to you, Ken. So please educate us.
Well, okay, so I think that most of the movement that we've been seeing has been by some of the more proactive governments. People from Oregon and from California and Texas have been reaching out. Of course, there's Colorado, but Colorado has a slightly different requirement. They have their own HB 211110, which has an earlier deadline and actually has real monetary damages associated with it. So local governments in Colorado have been absolutely petrified, but local governments around the country are also nervously concerned, let's just say. So we've been seeing a lot of outreach. A lot of organizations say that in the rest of the United States are starting this effort, kind of like Colorado local governments were 2 years ago. Right now, yeah, they're just very nervous about things, and I think that one of the things that they're struggling with is that they know that it's out there. There's this problem. There's this thing looming on the horizon. Yet, they're still kind of testing the waters in terms of like, okay, what do we do about this? Should we talk to our IT people? Should we talk to our legal people? Should we talk to your procurement people? Yes, yes, yes. But that still doesn't change the fact that there's most of them are still in that kind of early stages.
And Ken, per like House Bill 211110 here in Colorado, and that's where I'm located, is Colorado, and BIT is one of five preferred vendors for that particular House bill. So we help a lot of state of Colorado entities with that House Bill 211110, which went into effect on July 1 of this year, so just 3 weeks ago. And the big difference between that progressive bill and the DOJ from last year is state of Colorado is including internal facing applications as well, not just external. So is that correct in your view?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay.
Awesome. So my big question now that we're kind of into this conversation of Title II and that who does it apply to? Who is excluded or who are the exceptions? Because state and local governments that could include a lot of different programs and services or agencies, and so who does that extend out to, and who's excluded at this point?
Right now, it is all what's called public entities under Title II of the ADA. So it's all state and local governments, all state and local government agencies, all district governments, anything that's government, basically. It doesn't include federal grantees. That would be Section 504. Although having said that, there is a new 504 reg for healthcare providers, but that's a different story. It. Um, yeah, and that's going to have a huge ripple effects, but that's not what we're here to talk about. It includes also these weird governments, like government entities, like regional transit districts and things like that, that may overlap between different governments. So if you have a transit authority that runs in the Denver area that includes way more than just Denver, then that would be included as well. Every school district is covered. Anything that's basically an entity of a government entity is under the microscope for this.
So we're talking just a small part of society.
Yeah, just a tiny little piece. Yeah.
Cool. Amy, do we have any questions in the chat at this point? I'd love to bring in some outside questions if we have any.
We have an interesting comment. I wish people would not equate accessible design, or as said in a meeting yesterday, dumb down.
Interesting.
That
that is a good comment.
Yeah.
So that leads me, Ken, Mike, I'll let either of you jump in on this. What are one of those bigger mistakes? What are those larger mistakes that organizations are making when implementing accessibility, whether that be at the design phase or even earlier at the planning, the research, or later deployment, development, launch phases? Where are those mistakes happening, and what are some of those more costly or more detrimental mistakes?
Okay. So I'll take a stab at that. So my big beef is that organizations tend to think about accessibility purely as a technical problem. They think it's just a dev problem. They think it's just something that's like just some lines of code. They think that it's something that they could just push off to the developers and let them take care of it. Um, when you think about even the most basic things, like even alt text, that is just flat out wrong. I mean, if I'm a UX designer or I'm a copy author, I have a certain message that I'm trying to get across, especially when I'm putting in an image. I think that, those people should be the ones who are thinking about like what the alt text for the image should be. Instead, when the organization just does an automated scan of their website and it comes back with a problem on the alt text, who do they put it on? They always put it just on the developer. Oh, go fix that. And when in reality, the problem is a lot bigger than that. And consequently, another problem that's associated with that is that because they think it's always a technical problem, they always think that there's some software solution that'll magically fix all this stuff. And again, there's, WCAG, that nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, WCAG is, you can really only test about a quarter of the WCAG requirements with automated testing. So it's, yeah, it's not just a technical problem.
I think the stat that I've heard, Ken, is it's like 70%, if not more at this point, of accessibility happens in the design phase, which I think more people need to hear that. 70%, if not more, of accessibility decisions are made in that design phase.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can just looking at wireframes, for instance, just looking at the wireframes and properly marking up your wireframes. I mean, you can solve a ton of accessibility problems.
Yeah.
I
Mike, I'm curious, what's your take?
so agree with all of it. And since my background's all corporate, it's all, private sector. And anytime you wanted some systemic change within a large enterprise, right? It's not, by the way, when you're talking about a large enterprise, we're not just talking about the dev team, right? You're talking about the business analysts, the project managers, the executives on the business side. When you're talking about a systemic enterprise change, you have to lead with organizational development. You have to lead with education. And so why BIT leads with, like, to me, what we're doing is we want to educate organizations on what, like what accessibility is, what accessibility isn't, right? And it's across the enterprise of helping them understand, giving them this library, breaking down WCAG, helping them understand, like, yes, here's the technical pieces of it, but without because again, so much technical leads from the business, and this is in the public space too, right? It's the developers aren't out there just developing whatever websites or whatever user interfaces on their own in a vacuum. It has to be the entire enterprise to include the business side of the house, right? To understand what accessibility is and what it isn't. So totally agree with you, Ken, on it's not just a dev issue. This is an awareness, it's an education gap.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a really great question in the chat from Ebrima that I'm just going to read. As a blind accessibility specialist working in Section 508 and WCAG conformance, I often encounter leadership teams hesitant to prioritize accessibility unless lawsuits are imminent. Um, let's see. How can I better advocate for proactive compliance using business-centered language? Mike, would you like to take that stab at that since I just read that?
It's a great, what a great question. And it's so much of what, Ken, you and I, like, we're always focused on this adoption from the business, right? And realizing that accessibility is good for business. Like it is proven that accessibility is good for business. So I come from the private sector, and everything that we do is we're talking about, like, okay, does it drive revenue? Well, it drives so many things, to include revenue, customer participation. And so if you take this into the public sector, so what it allows you to do is to have more citizen engagement, right? And ultimately, governments need to hear for that. That's what governments are in place for, is, believe it or not, it's us, the citizens. And so you take this private industry language, this business language of it's good for commerce, it's good for business, it's good for the bottom line. Well, within the government space, it's good for citizen participation. And unfortunately, the disability community, so much, everything has been led with the stick, right? You got the carrot or the stick. And so love the fact that the DOJ and everything. But on the private sector, remember, this version of the Supreme Court is absolutely in favor of digital environments being accessible to all, right? So this is where the language from private sector to public sector, they just transfer over. This is good for business. Ken, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, it's really a matter of building that business case, and I think that the private sector has been trying to do that for a while. I remember Microsoft did some research with the Forrester Group a long time ago, where they found that if you incorporate accessibility, it actually improves the usability of your product for everybody.
Yep.
So I think that that's one thing to lead with. Another thing that I'm always thinking about, well, as a lawyer, I think about the stick as opposed to the carrot, of course. But and I think that can't be minimized. But
No.
I think that one of the things also is that accessibility is often perceived as something that's kind of like this nuisance or a blocking thing that prevents you from getting things done. When in fact, I think accessibility really can overlay with your existing processes really well. And that's one of the things that I think organizations are really petrified of. They don't want to take on another obligation that's going to stall their development. And if you can convince them, and yeah, I think that we've got several great cases of this, where if you implement accessibility intelligently, then it blends actually fairly well with security and privacy. It can be one of those things that just becomes part of the system, part of the process, as long as those requirements are understood in the beginning, and they're understood by everybody. Yeah, I mean the problem that accessibility often the reason why I think accessibility often gets a bad name is because too often it's always thought of at the last minute. And
Yeah.
yeah. And so that gets back to our conversation in the beginning, which is, try and build it in early. If you build it in early, then, it doesn't, it's a very easy lift.
Well, and I want to emphasize a point in there that yes, it gets that bad name in some of those environments, but also Mike, I know you and I have had a lot of conversations about the hesitation stemming from not being comfortable talking about disability in general, let alone accessibility and accommodations and all of that that comes with it. So, Mike, could you talk a little bit about that, the people side of that hesitation and not understanding and how the education and the awareness has overcome and helped facilitate some of that change just by becoming aware and educated.
It's love it. I love this conversation piece. So BIT, Blind Institute of Technology, like everything that we focus on from an employment perspective, like we're out there talking to, Fortune 50 companies, Fortune 5 companies, some of the largest brands in the world on the private sector to employ what we consider the greatest untapped human potential on the planet, which are professionals with disabilities. Okay. So ultimately, so the pitch is easy, right? To say something like that. Now, to achieve that, we have to talk about digital equity. We have to. And digital equity within private sector is the obstacle that we have in the private sector is a nebulous uh, policy conversation piece called reasonable accommodation. We're the only protected class that has to ring that legal nebulous bell called reasonable accommodation. And Ken, we could talk about this for a minute because reasonable accommodation, it's based on interpretation. It's not black and white. There's a lot of gray in there. And so when we go to organizations and talk about reasonable accommodations, we talk about like, okay, so to achieve this, it is digital equity. And then ultimately, when I'm talking to CIOs, CTOs, decision makers within organizations, letting them know, like, by the way, here is, examples of code, right, to make environments accessible. And here are applications that are already adopting digital equity, again, based on, the stick and the carrot. Private industry is moving this way, which is fantastic. But we have to help organizations realize, like, hey, a lot of your environment from a digital perspective is already accessible, right? But they don't know what they don't know. And HR leaders, they're gatekeepers for general counsel, and they're the protect the organization. Like this is all there's nothing nefarious about this, but they're aiming to protect organizations. But if they don't know reasonable accommodations, and they don't speak digital equity, right? They just don't know. And so our job is to educate them and realize, like, platforms like Salesforce, like, you've got the reasonable accommodation because you're already a Salesforce shop. Like, our job is to educate these organizations on what that all looks like, but how it's tethered. Again, employment for professionals with disabilities and digital equity, they're conjoined. These topics are all, it's one and the same. Ken, what am I missing?
No, you're not, yeah, you're not missing anything. I think yeah, the equity component is ultimately the driving force behind everything. And it's just such an easy business case.
It is, but what I feel like the missing piece to this, Ken, is it's awareness, it's education. Most
Yeah,
business leaders, like they're hesitant, and this is in the public sector too. They don't know what they don't know. And
exactly.
in the private sector, the obstacle is that reasonable accommodation conversation. But in the public sector, it's just people like, again, I tell folks all the time, because I'm blind, not dead. When I walk into a room and I'm out there networking all day long, like I can feel the uncomfortableness because I've got a cane. But I'm out there networking, shaking hands, kissing babies, doing that thing. And just, to me, our job as the disability community, like we need to be out there more. And more importantly, we need to be able to speak the language of business and couple it with some tech. We need to be able to speak nerd. Okay. And we don't have to be coders. We don't have to be programmers, but we need to be able to speak that language, which is WCAG. And when we start speaking a business in this WCAG language, we're going to make more of the world digitally equitable.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I just want to jump in from a user perspective. Mike, you and I met a couple of years ago, and when we first met, I didn't even disclose that I had a visual impairment, that I was losing my vision, and that career seeking process for me just a couple of years ago, I felt a lot of that uncomfortableness, a lot of that in the interview process, where most of my interviews stopped as soon as I disclosed that I was low vision, that I needed these accommodations because most of those employers didn't know how to provide those accommodations, and we see that more and more, and for me now in the position that I'm in, being able to educate and raise that awareness and sort of level that playing field, overcome some of those nerves, some of that anxiety from their perspective, it makes such a world of difference.
It does. Yeah, you've done an amazing job, James. You really have.
Well, it's only because of the people that I've surrounded myself with. So
It's because of you taking yourself on. So yeah, we're glad to be part of the James Warnken story. That's it.
That's right. We knew him when.
That's right. We knew him when, Ken. Yeah. So
well,
uh,
keeping us moving into the sort of back half of the conversation. So for the organizations that are aware, that are working to meet these deadlines, that are sort of putting in that effort, Ken, Mike, what are your recommendations? What are your best practices when it comes to documenting and almost in a sense proving that you are accessible? Because there's a lot of gray area in that conversation around validity, around the proof of how accessible your website or your documents or your apps actually are.
Ken, please.
Okay, thanks. This is a tough one, actually. The DOJ regulation says that you've got to make your websites and your digital content comply with WCAG 2.1 A and AA, unless doing so is an undue burden or fundamental alteration. The reality is that come April 24th, 2026 or April 24th, 2027, there are going to be about 0.01% of applications out there that these organizations are using that are WCAG 2.1 A and AA compliant. They just don't exist. It's like a unicorn. It's something that the reason is it's not because of some fault of theirs. It's just that it's just the nature of software development. If you even, organizations like Oracle and Microsoft and SAP and Apple have, they have a ton of federal customers and they've been subject to Section 508 since 1998. Well, actually, the regulations didn't kick in until 2000. But anyways, it's been 25 years. And so that's what gave rise to the VPAT and the ACR. If you go to any of those organizations' sites and you could pull up their ACRs, you're not going to see a perfect VPAT. And that's good because there's a saying at least among my friends in the consulting field, that show me a perfect VPAT and I'll show you a liar, because if you have a VPAT or an ACR that's absolutely perfect, um, there's something in all likelihood, they didn't test it thoroughly enough.
Right.
Software these days is just too complicated. So don't shoot for perfection. Instead, shoot for the best faith effort. And I think that really best faith effort is not the same as undue burden under the law, but you're going to end up violating a Title II reg. There's just no two ways about it because unless you can show an undue burden. And the only way that you can really show an undue burden is if you really document the heck out of things. And you can really show that, that you did everything that's possible. So I think that the two things that I would recommend is, well, apart from accepting the fact that that there's a certain level of risk involved, is that you have to think about you have to think about it in terms of risk. Like, what are the more popular systems that I've got? What are the which one of them have the biggest issues? In terms of overall risks to an organization when it comes to accessibility, I think there's two dimensions. One is, if you're talking about a web application, how many people are using it? How many people are actually affected by this thing? Something that's rarely ever used by people, that's a low priority. The other aspect of it is how big of a barrier does it create? Are the WCAG barriers like little minor barriers, or are the WCAG barriers blocking issues? And you think about it in terms of those two dimensions, you can figure it's easy to map out how risky or which applications are, the really important ones to address. then the next thing you have to do is plan for all of this stuff. So you have to lay out a plan in terms of, okay, how am I going to address those big things? Well, I'm going to go and test them. I'm going to go back to the vendor. I'm going to get the vendor to do as much as they possibly can. If the vendor isn't going to do all the things that, we ask them to do, then we'll go issue an RFP to replace that vendor. Those are the kinds of things that you have to start thinking about planning out and documenting in order to establish, an undue burden defense, so that when somebody sues you under Title II, yeah, technically you didn't meet the 50, you didn't meet the exact wording, but you're able to use that defense of undue burden. Undue burden is one of those things though, that lawyers and disability advocates are super uncomfortable with. We treat it like we're allergic to it, but unfortunately, DOJ kind of put us in this position where, they forced our hand where we've got to rely on it. And we've got to start thinking about how do we end up justifying that. So yeah, it really does involve a lot of examination and documentation.
So my last question, I want to open it up for general questions. My last question, if there's an entity out there that is just going to continue to pretend that this doesn't exist, they're going to continue to try to ignore it until these deadlines come. What happens then? What happens if you don't do anything? Or part two to the question, what happens if you're overly reliant on vendors and widgets and automated scans and testing tools without actually taking that step fully into the swimming pool?
Well, I would say I hope you've got a good legal defense fund.
What is there a dollar amount that's attached to that or?
No, not real. I mean, it's not. There are no damages associated with Title II, unless a plaintiff can show intentional discrimination, which is kind of a vague concept. Um, it's hard to define exactly what constitutes intent. Like, does intent mean that I knew that this was a problem, but I built it anyways, or does intent mean that I've got to actually show that I really had it out for people with disabilities, and I purposely chose the one that's inaccessible. Um, Intent it's not clearly defined in terms of what you have to show, but what is undeniable is the fact that you still have to pay an attorney to defend you in these cases, and that's not cheap either. It's like, even if you're not paying damages, you're still probably paying even if you're a government and you have to pay your attorney. Your attorney's got to draw in a salary. That just suddenly means that attorney's not able to do something else that they're also needed on. And eventually you're going to have to hire more attorneys, and well, that costs money. So yeah, if you don't take it seriously, it's it's you have to have a good legal defense fund, and you're just screwing yourself for the future. That's the other thing. It really, the earlier you start with this, and the quicker you make bake these processes into place, ultimately the easier it's going to be down the road.
So
And fundamentally, Ken, like again, the government is in place to serve its citizens,
Yeah.
right? Like, and so going back to kind of a fundamental business case for this, like, the government, kind of by for of the people, like whatever Gettysburg, like however we want to talk about this, like it should be, for the people, of the people, all that kind of stuff. Well, if you're leaving out, and the numbers are staggering for the amount of people with disabilities. And by the way, based on the boomer, the largest demographic of folks who are encountering disability maybe for the first time, right? Like as you age, your eyesight is going to diminish, your hearing is going to diminish, your motor skills are going to diminish, right? Like this is your cognitive will diminish. Like this is all science, right? And yet to overcome this, to help this demographic out, right, that are taxpayers, right, ultimately to build these government entities, like creating equity from a digital perspective, like this is not rocket surgery, right? It's not. It's just being intentional. It's like saying, well, gosh, we're not going to make our environments, we're not going to focus on cybersecurity anymore. Like it really, like there's no solid business case to say we're not going to do this. Like the business case is only bolstered based on everything that's happening around us. And so to me, it's just it is a conversation of just helping folks feel more comfortable with this, to bring them around to realize like, okay, there's no rocket surgery to digital equity. As a matter of fact, making environments more digitally equitable is actually easier than cybersecurity. It's easier than DevOps. It's easier than some of these technical concepts that are very, very expensive. Most of digital accessibility in our experience, like 85, 90%, we're talking, you know, very low effort, right? Level of effort, very low effort on these 85, 90. If you get in front of it, if you just continue to wait and have more and more tech debt, that's when it gets more expensive.
Fantastic. Awesome. Well, I could ask questions all day. I've been asking both of you questions for like 3+ years at this point. So I'm going to turn it over. Do we have any questions, comments in the chat that
Yeah,
we
so
could
we
tackle
have,
before we sort of wind things down?
yep, we have a great question. This comes from Cindy. I'm a specialist working in Section 508. It seems many are getting frustrated that 508 and DHS trusted tester process is stuck at level 2.0 AA level compliance, where the rest of the world is adopting higher standards. How can we come together to demand an update to minimum standards complying to level 2.2 at the federal level?
That's a
Ooh,
great question. Ken, I
yeah,
think that's all you.
that's all
Yeah.
you can.
Yeah. 2.2 is a bit of a reach right now. There aren't that many organizations that are embracing it. New Zealanders just recently moved there, but New Zealand's always been like an outlier. They were like first out of the gate to go to 2.1. Um, and even the EU is, yeah, I guess the EU is transitioning over to 2.2. The federal government rulemaking is just so incredibly painful that just getting a 2.0 in the last 508 refresh was like a slog. And
Didn't it take almost 10 years?
yeah, it did. So but I don't know whether it really makes that much of a difference. I mean, 2.0 is a pretty darn good standard, and most organizations don't even reach that. Getting to 2.1, yes, 2.1 is a pretty sizable upgrade from 2.0. 2.2, there are only six additional success criteria that are at the A and double A level, and it's things like target size and things like that are important, but they're not at the same. I wouldn't say that they're, I think just, let's just focus in on a 2.x standard. Um, because I mean, most organizations just don't get there. But yes, I would have loved to get a 2.2 in trusted tester. That would be fantastic if we had a more
Fingers,
flexible government.
fingers crossed by 2035.
Yeah, but and the other thing I would say is that if it did focus on 2.2, there is a lot of well, almost a complete backward compatibility to 2.0. I think the only inconsistency is WCAG 4.1.1 parsing, which they got that dropped in 2.2. But other than that, it's anything if you build your site to 2.2 or you build your site to 2.1, you're going to be 2.0. So, yeah, anyways, that's just my take.
Okay, it's really clear that leadership buy-in is a major theme for our attendees together. So we have a similar question to Abrima's earlier, and this is twofold here. How can leadership incorporate accessibility into their workflow, and how does this affect legal compliance? What common mistakes do organizations make when trying to secure leadership buy-in for accessibility initiatives, especially when leadership is focused only on legal risk rather than long-term inclusion?
Another fantastic question.
Yeah, leadership responds to legal risk. There's no two ways about it. If you want the quickest way to get your organization to move to something, you get their attorneys worried about it. But attorneys have to deal with a lot of risk, and so that's where business opportunities and, convincing them that it's not that difficult to overlay accessibility over the way in which they're already handling privacy and security, that makes it a lot easier. And that's also, I think, where you can start the conversation about how to get buy-in for trying to incorporate these ideas earlier on. It's a combination of everything that we've been saying, in the sense that it's not just a technical issue. It's not just a developer issue. When people think about that, they think about, oh, let's just push it to the end. Let's just push it to the, right before we ship, as opposed to thinking about it during the UX and the design phase. So instead, I think that, well, James knows this. I mean, at Converge, we created a product called WebAlign, and the point of that is to create requirements for copy authors and graphic designers and UX designers that make WCAG boil down to their language, so that way you can overlay it into all the design processes, and so you could tell, you know whether a product is on the right track for meeting WCAG before you start writing code. From the design phase, oh yeah, the UX designers did all the things that they were supposed to do. So tools like that and that kind of thinking in terms of about how to incorporate WCAG is, I think, I think that's the thinking about tools like that is really the answer, because it's an easy to overlay solution. It gives you visibility it gives leadership and managers visibility into how compliance is being managed from the very get-go. But unfortunately, there's been, some organizations are just relatively slow to adapt to that. Now, the messaging around that, oh boy, that's a good question. If we knew the answer to that, then we wouldn't be having this conversation. We'd all be talking about, like, oh, what do we do with all this accessibility? It's everywhere. We're not there yet.
Okay, great. Here's another one along those same lines. How can accessibility advocates within an organization effectively translate legal and ethical imperatives into business language that resonates with executive leadership?
Mike, I think that one sounds like you.
ChatGPT. Again, these are some of those. So the legal, God, to translate it over to like this messaging conundrum that we have, right? And that's really what it is. So organizations know their legal obligations, or organizational leaders know the risk, right? That's all clear. And again, focusing on the conversion of that over to leadership to understand, like, okay, so cool, you have to do this based on risk, but you kind of want to do this based on, again, whom you're serving, right? And if you're a business, you're serving customers or shareholders, all that sort of thing. Accessibility, it's proven. It is an amazing business case. It really is, and you can prove that out financially. There's so much data that's out there. So converting this from legal, ethical. I love the way you put ethical in there too. But to take this from that stance of like, hey, this is just good from business, from the legal, ethical to the business. Like, it really is an exercise in collaboration. There are entities like Blind Institute of Technology, like Converge. So find entities like ours that are like, there's a bigger reason why we're doing the work. We're not just trying to sell you a subscription. We're not just trying to push hours out on you. There's reasons. There are organizations in this space that are wanting to do this for the bigger reason. And we really are wanting to affect, because we have personal engagement. Ken and family are personally engaged. BIT, we're personally engaged with this. So find organizations that, quite honestly, are there for the right reason and not just trying to push their bottom line agenda towards you. So I'm not trying to say, hey, just email us, but at the end of the day, like, not like working collaboratively on this, it serves it serves the bigger mission. And so find partners like Ken or myself, James, like we're here for the bigger picture.
Yeah. I just want to add one quick thing to that, Mike, doubling back to the education part of it. It a lot of what I share with the students that I teach through the digital accessibility course is learn the language of who you're trying to talk to. All of us are in our professional lives speaking different languages, developers, designers, accessibility, leadership, and when you can learn their language and translate accessibility into their language, they're going to have a significantly easier time understanding and then knowing what to do with that information versus having to decipher and decode it and then understand it and then take action. So I think a lot of it, like I've met so many people like that I filled out the contact us form and submitted this bug on XYZ website or app, and nobody ever messaged me back and they probably just didn't understand it. And so that language gap between what we're saying and what they're hearing, oftentimes from my experience, is one of those contributing factors that like shuts that door. It closes that window of opportunity. And the more we can get on their page faster, the easier that conversation becomes.
Yeah, I can't agree with that more, James. And working with local governments, I've noticed that it really helps when somebody from the comms department, communications department, starts allying with you because then it becomes then their entire job revolves around how do I take this message that somebody wants to get out there and make it resonate with a particular group. And it's a matter of, a mental load. It's a matter of, simplifying a message. It's a matter of trying to figure out what their job role is and things like that. Yeah, meet people where they are, and this becomes an infinitely easier task.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, I think that's a perfect place to sort of cut things off for today. This conversation does not stop here. Just a couple of closing things as we do wind down. Just a reminder, this has been recorded. The replay will be available to everyone who did register. If you want to continue the conversation, there's lots of different ways to do that. Amy is going to help me by putting a couple of links in the chat as we go through these. So as you hear them, they should appear there for you. Bookmark, star them, favorite them so that you can return to them later. But the first one, if your organization is serious about building lasting accessibility, check out BIT's Train the Trainer program. That's centered around that education, that awareness, that collaborative approach to accessibility. I lead that training, so I look forward to seeing you. The second piece here is just as a reminder, the new Title II web accessibility deadlines are approaching fast. April 24th, 2026 for larger entities, and April 24th, 2027 for smaller entities. To learn more, you can check out the official websites on the final rule and the fact sheets to get all of that information around what applies to you directly. And don't forget, public entities have always had an obligation to ensure effective communication under Title II of the ADA. If you need a refresher, you can always find the full regulations at the ADA Title II regulations website. If you want to stay connected to BAT, Converge, Ken, Mike, myself, Amy, there's lots of different ways to do that. So I'm just going to run through these quickly. If you want to get your questions answered that we weren't able to get to, you can send those to info@blindit.org. We will answer those. We will respond. We will loop in Ken and team. So you might hear multiple responses come back from just a single question. So don't be afraid to reach out if we didn't get to your question. If you want to connect with Ken and Converge directly, Ken has kindly shared his calendar link, a link back to the Converge accessibility website. Don't ignore their blog. The legal updates blog on the Converge accessibility website is one of the main ways I get information. And so definitely encourage you to check out the Converge blog. And if you want to email Ken directly, his email is being shared in the chat as well. From the BIT side, similar run. If you want to connect, Mike's calendar is being shared right now. The website is blindinstituteoftechnology.org or blindit.org. Those will both take you to the same place to learn more about BIT and how we are approaching the conversation. If you want to stay up to date, BIT does have a monthly newsletter. We encourage everyone to subscribe to stay up to date with all of the things happening at BIT, both in front of and behind the scenes. And then lastly, follow along on social media. BIT is on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Mastodon, all of the main social media platforms. So with that, just want to say a huge thank you to Ken and Mike for taking the time to hang out with us today to answer all of these great questions that I'm sure most of us were thinking, but didn't know who to ask or were maybe a little bit intimidated to ask it because we didn't want to seem like we weren't fully up to speed and didn't know everything about this conversation. So thank you for joining, answering the questions, and providing so much insight and information. And thank you to everybody who joined, who registered, whether you're here live, whether you're watching this recording 6 months from now when the deadlines are happening. We appreciate you taking this conversation seriously and being a part of creating a more accessible and inclusive future for everyone. So thank you, and we hope you all have a fantastic rest of your Tuesday afternoon. Don't be afraid to reach out.
Thanks, James. Well done.
Yeah. Thanks, James. And thanks, everyone.